If you would like to open your Bible to Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6. If you are guilty like I am sometimes of singing the songs but not really thinking through the words to them a lot because things are happening on your row or because you're just maybe caught up in the music of it or whatever it may be, I would encourage you to go back on YouTube or Facebook or wherever this week and look at the words to all the songs we just sang, because I don't know if Jack looked ahead to where we were going to be talking today or if the Spirit was moving or a little bit of both, but almost all of them fit into what we're talking about today and probably preach the message a little better than I will. So go back and take a look at those. Now, as we start here in Matthew 6, I want to ask you a question. What is the most valuable item you have, the most valuable thing that you own? And I will tell you, when I think of this question, the first thing that always comes to mind for me is the 1984 Don Mattingly Donruss rookie card. When I was a kid, I had this card. And if you're a baseball card collector, and there are probably a few of us here, you know that at some point along the way, in the mid-'80s, this was kind of the holy grail of baseball cards. It peaked somewhere when I was in high school, probably at about $90 of value, which to a high school student is huge. And so I looked at this card and I thought, I've got to time this just right. I'm going to sell it at just the right time. And like so many things in life, I waited too long. Ended up selling it after college for about $50, which still wasn't bad for something you got out of a package at the 7-Eleven with gum in it and everything else. That's the way I bought the card. But it was worth a lot somewhere along the way. Now, later on into high school years, I got a Commodore 128 computer. And those of you who are computer people might remember one of those from about 30 years ago. And it was the thing. And my friends would come over and we would play games on this computer. And I learned how to program things that would make dots move around the screen because that's useful. And then later in life, when I got to be 18, my grandfather bought me an Isuzu pickup truck. He went to the Isuzu dealer that was a friend of his that he did gun work for, and he traded some gun work and some cash in a shoebox from his gun safe for this $7,500 brand new truck. And as an 18-year-old, that was the most valuable thing I had. And as I've gone through life, that thing has changed. Now it usually tends to be a house or a car, something like that. But there are things we have that are of monetary value. And then I want you to think of this. I found this on Amazon. If you have everything, this is the thing you need, apparently. It is the license plate you can put on the front of your car. He who dies with the most toys wins. You can buy it for $10.55 on Amazon. It has 2 5-star reviews. And you can let everyone know how important stuff is to you. Or we could go the other route, and you can buy this bumper sticker. He who dies with the most toys still dies. And I've also seen this on t-shirts with a verse from Mark where Jesus talks about gaining everything but losing your own soul. There's a lot of different attitudes about stuff in our world. So now I want you to think in a different way. What is the most meaningful item that you have? The most meaningful thing, the most important thing to you, maybe with some sentimental value to it. What's the most meaningful item that you have? And when I think of this question, what always comes to mind is this thing in my garage. Now, a lot of us in Oklahoma have one of these or one outside your house or maybe a safe room within your house, the place you go when the storms come. And I have had this thing for, I guess, going on 2 years now. We have cleaned it out a couple times. It has water bottles in it and essentials and all of that. Not had to go in there during a storm yet. I probably should not have mentioned that because now it's going to happen. But anyway, when I think of the most important thing I have, the most valuable thing I have when it comes to sentiment, I always think of if I had 5 minutes warning that the tornado was in Rolfe and headed our way, or the tornado was close by and headed our way. If I had 5 minutes to go look around the house and grab something to take here with me, what would I grab? Now, my wife, being the accountant in the family, has thought through these kind of things in a logical way and has a little file that has passports and birth certificates and all of the things that would be difficult to replace. I always think of 2 things right off the top. The flag from my grandfather's casket that's in one of those cases on a bookshelf, and our wedding photos. Those are 2 things that I could not replace if the tornado came through, if fire came through, whatever it is. And most of you have some things like that too when it comes to thinking of stuff. Now, we have thought through over and over again this statement that Matthew 5:17 through 20, and I'd encourage you each week to go back and read that again because we haven't, is the most important, most significant passage in the Bible on how to read the Bible. It talks about how Jesus came to fulfill, not to abolish the law. And we've asked a question of ourselves about how we read the Bible into different issues throughout this. I want to ask a different question this morning, beyond just the how do we read the Bible question. I want to ask you, how did they read the Bible about material things? That's what Jesus is about to talk about here in Matthew 6. How did the people he's talking to read the Bible when it came to stuff, when it came to material things, when it came to wealth, when it came to blessings? And I believe the way they would read the Bible when it came to those things is in Deuteronomy 28. In Deuteronomy 28 basically tells this moral, this ethic. When you're obedient to God, blessings come. When you're disobedient to God, curses come. This is the reality into which they existed. Okay, so when they saw people who had lots of blessings, their assumption would be these people are obedient to God. And when they saw people that were just having an awful time, their thought would be, these people are being cursed by God somehow. And we see this play out, by the way, a lot of times in the New Testament. We see it in John 9, when the blind man is healed. Everyone assumes someone had to have sinned because this guy is blind and he's sitting here. They would think of that as curses. Other times they would think of people with wealth. You think of the rich man that comes to Jesus and asks about what's important, what's the greatest command. They would think of him as a person of wealth, as someone who has been blessed by God, and that blessing comes out of obedience. Now, I like to think that this attitude, this thought process, ended way back in Deuteronomy, or at the very least at the point here where Jesus teaches about it. But I know better, and you probably know better. We fall into this trap sometimes too. And we feel like when things are not going our way financially, we must have done something to upset God. And we feel like when things are going really well financially, that we must be right with God. Whatever it is we're doing, God must be blessing because look at how well it's going. And neither of those thoughts are thoughts that are New Testament Christian kind of thoughts. We fall into them because they seem to make logical sense. But Jesus is going to turn that on its ear here in Matthew 6, starting in verse 19. So before, we assume who is rich. And we tend to do this. I like to think of, well, when I think of the rich, it is people who are wealthier than I am. Now, we'll think of people who have yachts and mansions and all of those things. We'll think of people who own companies, and we'll think of people who, in all of it, by the way, and maybe I've even hit on one of you at this point with one of those descriptions, at some point there's going to be somebody who follows God that probably is one of those things. We may think of occupations that come with that. We may think of levels of money that come with that. Before you assume that when Jesus is talking about riches and wealth, and that when we talk about riches and wealth, that we're talking about somebody else, I want you to think for a minute in this context. More than 1 billion people in the world live on less than $1 per day. 1 billion people, less than $1 a day. About 3 billion live on less than $2 per day. And between 12 and 20% of Americans live below what we call our poverty line. So before we assume that wealthy is someone that is way, way beyond us, think about how these 2 billion plus or 3 billion plus people would look at you and I sitting here today. I went on Thursday to the new Starbucks. I ordered ahead on my Starbucks app on my smartphone, so I wouldn't have to wait in line too long. My plan was foiled because I still had to wait in line for a while. And I got my $5 cup of coffee. And I will tell you, it was the best cup of coffee I've had this week. And I've probably had about 60 at this point with my coffee habit. But it was the best cup I've had all week. But it was a $5 cup of coffee. I wonder what it would feel like to talk to these 3 billion people with the $5 cup of coffee in my hand about wealth and about how I'm not really rich. That's other people that we're talking about here. We need perspective in all of this as we talk. And let's not do what we sometimes do, which is assume when Jesus talks to whoever he's talking to someone else. Let's not be the people that when I get out of here say, you know, so-and-so really needed to hear that today. I'm glad they were here. Or so-and-so really needed to hear that. I wish they were here. So Jesus begins talking about material things. How do we read the Bible about material things? In all of our treasures with us. The door itself rusts a little bit, and every year I kind of clean that off and repaint it again, and they told me that'll happen, and you have to do that. What are our treasures? And I like the way that Jesus uses the word treasures here, because it changes the imagery for us. What do you think of when you think of to you sentimentally? Because those things are treasures, and unfortunately, oftentimes, just the things that are things of wealth become the treasures. They become the things that are most important to us. That $7,500 brand new Isuzu pickup truck that I had at age 18, I drove back to Alabama, my first trip from college. It was for homecoming at my school, and I went there to homecoming. I parked, by the way, understand how folks treat trucks. We abuse those things. We use them to do all kinds of stuff, and it's a tool to be used. Do our tools to be used, do the things God has blessed us with, instead become treasures. Because when they become treasures, we treat them differently. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. So what he teaches us here is there are things that are temporary and there are things that are permanent. The treasures we have on earth are temporary. I can take those wedding pictures and my grandfather's flag down into the shelter every time there's a storm, one under one arm and one under the other, and at the end, those are still as valuable and as important as they are to me, temporary. The Commodore 128 computer from high school is just a distant memory now. I had a memory come up on Facebook the other day of the day I sold the Isuzu pickup truck. I drove it for 17 years, by the way. The day I sold it was a sad day, but it is long gone now. I sold it for $500, if I remember right. Might have been $750. Didn't get a whole lot out of it. It went on to somebody else. I remember seeing it drive around town one day, having a moment of sadness, but then just recognizing it's just another thing. All the things here are temporary, but when we're laying up treasures in heaven, those things are permanent. The reason we're here, the reason we're watching online, is permanent. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Notice the order here, by the way. Because I think most of us, if we were to word this, we would say where our heart is, our treasure is. He flip-flops it, very much on purpose. Where your treasure is, your heart is. Your heart is going to follow that treasure and go to those places because it is about where our focus is. When we focus in on the things of earth, and again, don't assume this is speaking to someone that has things you will never have or things that you don't think are important because why would anyone waste their money on that? Almost all of us have something like that. Something we spend our money on that doesn't make sense, someplace we put our focus that doesn't make sense, someplace we put our focus is just not all that important in the grand scheme of things. And where we put our treasure says something about where our focus is. The eye is the lamp of the body, verse 22. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? This is all just a question of idolatry. What Jesus is really teaching about here, it's not really money and wealth and people who are wealthier than us and rich people that we feel like are just beyond where we're at. It is idolatry. We are worshiping something in life, and we're going to choose what it is we worship. So the question for us this morning is, what do we worship? It's the reason I talked about what I did at the beginning. We go to the doctor and the dentist when we have to go to the doctor and the dentist. Sometimes it's a regular thing that you go for. For a lot of us, you just go if there's a problem. And when you go there, you find out very quickly if you have been doing the things they told you to do. Because if you have been, those appointments tend to go much better than if you haven't. What do we worship? Are we just here on Sundays, watching on Sundays, because this is the time we kind of regroup with God, and then we go back into regular life to do the other things we like to do, and focus on the other things we like to focus on? Or are we continuing to do what we're talking about and doing here? We look at the people at the foot of Mount Sinai making a golden calf, and we think, those crazy people, why would they do that? And then we go out on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, and we do the same thing. I wish sometimes that whatever it is that we are so focused on would just immediately flip into a golden calf, and then we would know. We would realize, that's what I'm doing. It's all about what we worship. No one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. We've convinced ourselves we can't. We've convinced ourselves I can put God in this compartment here, I can put stuff in this compartment here, and it won't interfere with God. Or maybe even God is over all of it, but I can just latch on to this. You cannot serve God and money. I'm not clicking for some reason back there, Jared. Can you click one for me? There we go. So how do we set our direction? all of this, if it's about focus and idolatry and worship, the key to it is direction. How are we going to set our direction? I've been reading this book this week, Love Does, by Bob Goff. If you think I have good stories, and some of you do, you've talked to me about that, every chapter in this book is a story better than any story I've ever told. And they're all stories from his life. Bob Goff is a lawyer. He talks early in the book about the way he became a lawyer. He took the LSAT, I believe it is, you have to take to get into law school. He did not do well enough to get into law school, and so he went and he met with the dean of the law school. And he said, all you have to do is say these words to me, go buy your books, and I can become a student. I know you have the power to do that. Doesn't matter what I scored on the test, doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. You have the power to say to me, go buy your books, and I will be a student at this school. And the guy just laughed and said, yeah, I'm not going to do that. Appreciate your persistence, but no. And so since he did not have a job or school to go to, he found a chair outside that dean's office and sat there every day. Every day of the semester of law school, he sat there, and as the dean would walk by, he would say, just 4 words, go buy your books, 4 words. And the dean would smile and go on. Day after day after day, he sat there and he kept thinking, surely one day he's going to give in. And he wouldn't. And day after day, and finally after months of sitting outside the dean's office, one day the dean stopped and looked at him kind of with a weird look and said, I got a smile on his face, and then just said, go buy your books. And he went and bought his books, and he's now a lawyer. And so this lawyer had decided, he lives in the Los Angeles area, that what he wanted to do was go on a boat in the Transpac race. The Transpac race is a race where they take sailboats, and they go from Los Angeles to Hawaii. And the way that works is you have a 45-foot boat you have to be on. There's a regulation to it. And he could never do it because he couldn't get access to a boat that large. Finally, one year they lowered it to a 35-foot boat, and he was able to get hold of one of those. And so he got that, and the way you go is you have a crew of 5 that goes, and it's the old-fashioned way. You have to navigate by the stars and by the sun. You cannot take your GPS. And so he decided they were going to get a ringer as one of their 5, and he knew a guy that was a navigator on a U.S. Navy destroyer who happened to be on leave. And he said, would you be our navigator? And the guy said, yeah, that sounds like fun. Let's go. And so they had it all planned. This guy had his tool, the sextant, which is this thing you see on the right side of the screen, which is something you see in a lot of pictures of Galileo or paintings of Galileo. This is the way he was going to navigate. He had the sextant and about a 2-foot-high stack of books. And they're going to navigate from LA to California. 5 days before the journey was to begin, the orders changed for this Navy destroyer navigator, and he had to go back out on a Navy boat. And so the 4 guys that were left had to pick a 5th guy who knew nothing about navigation, and they drew straws for who was going to be the navigator. And this destroyer navigator took his sextant and his books with him, by the way, went back to the Navy. Bob Goff, the author of the book, drew the short straw. He had to be the navigator. He went down to a marine store, bought a plastic sextant, and had the guy on aisle 5 explain to him how it works. And for about 10 minutes, he told him all the things he would have to do and the books he would need, and he got to the end of it, and Bob Goff, the lawyer, said, you know, I really didn't understand anything you just said. Can you give me like the short version? And so the guy told him, basically what you need to do is find a couple points of reference. And you need to sit down with your map and your sextant and find your points of reference and draw a line from where you are to where it is you want to go. And then just go. And you want to recheck every now and then to make sure you're still on the right line, get your points of reference again, and make sure, but then you go. You follow that line and you trust it. For each of us, we have to pick out what our point of direction is. Is our point of direction going to be the point of this world, which is everything Jesus is preaching against right here? Stuff. He who dies with the most toys wins. That's the point of the direction the world would teach us. What Jesus would teach us is we need a different one. And Bob Goff in the book suggests a couple that I think are just great. The first one being the obvious, Jesus. Jesus should be our point of direction. So when we look to him and we see the things that he does, the way he treats people, the way he interacts with the world, the things he teaches about, and we set our focus on that and draw our line from where we are to where he is, we will find ourselves moving in the right direction. And his second point of direction that he mentions in the book are people that surround us. Are we surrounded by people who are doing this, who are setting their line toward Jesus, or are we surrounded by people that are setting their line somewhere else? And if we are around the wrong folks, then we have to remember who the right folks are. Now, Jesus has this way of he surrounds himself with everybody and is still able to keep going in the right direction. For us, it's a little more difficult, and we still need to be around other folks because we've got to lead them to him too. But we have to remember which folks are helping guide our path and which ones are we there to help guide. And so again, what we just read in Matthew 6:24, no one can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. We have to serve the right master. Who are we serving this morning? What are we secure in today? Because all of the stuff that we think is important, it's going to go away. Whatever the most valuable thing in the world to you is, at some point the moths will destroy, the thieves will come in and it is time to reset the path. The way that chapter ends in Goff's book is just a beautiful thought. He spent 16 days in the Pacific, I don't know how long, and he reads off the name of your boat, and then one by one he reads your name. And he doesn't talk about Bob Goff, the guy who wrote the book, and what an awful navigator he is. He doesn't talk about the things that went wrong on the journey. He says, welcome home. And know that he's waiting to say, welcome home. If you need to be welcomed home to your church family this morning or start that road toward him, please come while we stand and sing.